The house was quiet, too quiet. Dad was out of town for the weekend, and I was supposed to have the place to myself. At least that's what I thought. Water dripped from my hair as I stepped out of the bathroom, a towel slung low around my waist. Steam curled out into the hallway, vanishing into the dark. The air outside the bathroom was cooler, sending a shiver down my spine. I had planned to grab a snack, maybe crash on the couch with a movie, but then, laughter. Soft, low teasing. A woman's voice. I froze mid-step, every nerve in my body going tight. Olivia was supposed to be at work. I strained to listen. The laughter came again, drifting up from downstairs, followed by the clink of ice against glass. Then a murmur, deep male. Someone else was with her. Slowly, carefully, I moved toward the staircase. The wood was cool beneath my bare feet as I stopped at the top, gripping the banister. I peered over the edge. The living room was dimly lit, the glow of the TV flickering across the walls. The screen played some late-night show, but no one was watching. Olivia sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, swirling a drink in her hand. She wore an oversized white shirt, the collar slipping off one shoulder. The hem barely covered her thighs. She wasn't alone. A man sat beside her. He wasn't my father. My grip on the banister tightened. His hand rested on her knee, slow, deliberate. She didn't pull away. If anything, she shifted slightly, just enough to let him know she didn't mind. A smirk played on her lips as she leaned in, her voice dropping to a murmur. I couldn't hear what she said, but whatever it was made the man chuckle. The sound sent a chill through me. This was wrong. This was very wrong. Then her gaze lifted and locked onto mine. A sharp inhale. A flicker of something across her face. Surprise? Amusement? Then just as quickly she masked it, leaning back against the couch. She tugged at the hem of her shirt, as if suddenly aware of how much skin she was showing. Didn't know you were home, she said, voice smooth, unreadable. The man turned slightly. He was in his late 30s, sharp jawline, dark eyes. He looked me over like I was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Alex, Olivia said, gesturing lazily. An old friend. Alex gave a nod. Nothing more. Olivia took a slow sip of her drink, her eyes never leaving mine. The ice in her glass clinked as she swirled it. The air between us was thick, charged with something I didn't understand. I should have looked away. I should have turned and gone back upstairs, pretended I hadn't seen anything. But I didn't. I couldn't. And I wasn't ready for what happened next. The silence stretched. Olivia held my gaze, her lips slightly parted as if she was about to say something. But she didn't. Instead, she took another sip of her drink, slow, deliberate. Alex shifted beside her, setting his glass down on the coffee table. He didn't seem bothered by my presence. If anything, he looked bored. I should probably head out, he murmured, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Olivia didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on me. You don't have to. It wasn't an invitation. It was a test. Alex exhaled, standing up and stretching. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the couch. I'll call you, he said. She nodded, still not looking away from me. A few moments later, the front door clicked shut behind him. The air in the room thickened. Olivia leaned back into the couch, exhaling slowly. The ice in her glass rattled as she swirled the last bit of whiskey. Didn't expect you back tonight. I live here, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. Her lips curved slightly. Fair point. I should have left it there. I should have turned and gone upstairs. But something in the way she was watching me, calm, unreadable, completely unfazed by what had just happened, held me in place. Who is he? I asked. She smirked. Jealous. A slow burn started in my stomach. Dad doesn't know. She laughed, soft, almost amused. You don't know what your father does and doesn't know. I clenched my jaw. She was playing with me, testing me, and I hated that it was working. She stretched her legs out, bare thighs catching the light from the TV screen. You're all grown up now, she murmured. Guess I forget that sometimes. My pulse jumped. Her gaze flicked over me, slow, assessing, stopping for just a fraction of a second too long where my towel sat dangerously low on my hips. I swallowed hard. She noticed. A flicker of something dark passed through her eyes. She leaned forward, setting her empty glass down on the coffee table. The movement made the shirt slip further off her shoulder, exposing more skin. I should have looked away, but I didn't. "You're staring," she said. I forced myself to blink. "You're drunk." She smirked. "Not nearly enough." I turned, ready to walk away, to end whatever this was before it became something neither of us could take back. Then, wait. I froze. I didn't turn around. I felt her move before I saw her, before I felt the faintest brush of fingertips ghosting over my wrist. My breath hitched. Too close. Too dangerous. I stepped back. She let me. For now. But something told me this wasn't over. I woke up later than usual, my body restless from the tension still lingering in the air. The house was quiet. No sign of Olivia. Good. I needed space. Needed time to push last night out of my head. I headed downstairs, stretching as I made my way to the kitchen. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, steam curling from a half-empty mug on the counter. She was here. My pulse kicked up. Then I saw her. She stood by the window, bathed in soft morning light. A silk robe hung loosely around her, barely tied, revealing smooth skin underneath. She held a cigarette between her fingers, exhaling slowly. I should have left. Should have walked out without a word. But instead I found myself staring. She turned her head slightly. "Didn't think you'd sleep this late." My throat was dry. "Didn't sleep much." A smirk played on her lips. "Neither did I." I hated how my body reacted to those words. She flicked the cigarette into the ashtray, then turned fully toward me, the robe slipping just enough to make my breath catch. "Want coffee?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "I can make my own." She chuckled. "Suit yourself." She moved past me, close enough that the fabric of her robe brushed against my arm. I felt the warmth of her body, the scent of her skin. I gritted my teeth. She was doing this on purpose, and I didn't know how much longer I could ignore it. By the time night rolled around, the tension had only grown thicker. I tried avoiding her all day, but every time I turned a corner, there she was, watching me, testing me. At dinner, she sat across from me, idly twirling a fork between her fingers. Her robe was gone, replaced by a tank top and shorts that left little to the imagination. She caught me looking. "Something wrong?" she asked, feigning innocence. I exhaled sharply. "You tell me." Her smirk deepened. Then she leaned forward, resting her chin on one hand. "You seem tense." I clenched my jaw. "And you seem different." Her eyes darkened slightly. "Maybe you're just noticing things you never did before." I gripped my fork tighter. This wasn't a game anymore. She stood up, stretching, her back arching slightly. "I think I'll take a bath," she murmured. I said nothing. I was already losing. I tried to sleep. I really did. But the house felt different. The air, heavier. My thoughts tangled. Then I heard it. The faint sound of water running. I swallowed hard. I knew where it was coming from. I should have turned over. Should have forced myself to sleep. Instead I got up. Each step toward the bathroom felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I stopped at the door. The faint scent of lavender drifted through the small crack. Steam curled out, warm and inviting. My pulse pounded. I wasn't thinking anymore. I reached for the handle. And then, "Come in," her voice called softly from the other side. I froze. Every nerve in my body went rigid. She knew I was standing there. She had been waiting. I swallowed, my throat dry. I wasn't ready. But I opened the door anyway. The bathroom was shrouded in steam, the air thick and heavy, curling around me as I stepped inside. My heart raced, each beat loud in my ears, drowning out the soft trickle of water from the bathtub. The light was dim, casting a soft glow across the room. The scent of lavender was overpowering, intoxicating, filling my senses, making everything feel surreal. She was there. Olivia lay back in the tub, the water almost covering her entirely, leaving only her shoulders and neck exposed. Her eyes met mine immediately. No surprise. No shock. Just that calm, steady gaze, like she knew this was coming. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the air growing warmer. The tension that had been simmering for days, weeks, even months now bubbled to the surface. It was undeniable. The pull between us, magnetic and fierce, had been building, teasing me, daring me to act, daring me to cross the line. I stood there, frozen at the threshold, unsure whether to step forward or run the other way. She broke the silence, her voice low and sultry, cutting through the thick air. "Are you just going to stand there?" My throat tightened. I knew this wasn't right. I knew it. But the way she looked at me, the way her fingers skimmed the surface of the water, sending ripples across the tub, it made it impossible to look away. I swallowed, stepping into the room. My body moved before my mind could catch up, my feet carrying me further inside as if they were no longer my own. The space between us closed, but the distance felt like miles. She smiled, small, subtle, but the weight behind it was heavy. She knew what was happening. "Do you want to join me?" she asked, her words dripping with meaning. The question was innocent on the surface, but I felt it hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't prepared for this. I couldn't be. I stood there, trembling slightly, caught between the urge to back away and the overwhelming need to stay. "You know this is wrong," I muttered, the words coming out rough. Olivia's smile widened, and she leaned forward slightly, the water sloshing gently as she did. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the tub. A simple motion, but it seemed to pull me in. "Wrong," she repeated, almost teasing. "Why is it wrong? Because it's forbidden? Or because you're afraid?" My pulse quickened. I wanted to say something, anything, to call her out, to walk away, to remind myself that this was madness. But I couldn't. Not when every part of me was drawn to her, like a moth to a flame. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable now. "You think I don't know how this makes you feel?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating, but I could feel it. The heat in the room, the intensity of her gaze, the weight of the moment. Then, as if on cue, she reached up, her hand brushing over the side of the tub. She didn't say a word, but the movement was a clear invitation. The tension in the room snapped tight. I stepped closer, almost instinctively. My body seemed to betray me, and before I could stop myself, I was standing at the edge of the tub, staring down at her. She didn't look away. "Come here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the water. The way she said it, so commanding, so certain, it struck something deep inside me. I had no words, no defenses left. I crouched beside the tub, my breath catching in my throat. The heat from the water, from her, made everything feel amplified. Every heartbeat, every second, every movement felt like it was happening in slow motion. For a long moment, nothing else mattered but the sound of her breathing, soft and steady. And then she reached up, her fingers brushing against my wrist. The touch was light, delicate, but it sent an electric jolt through me. She could feel it too. I could tell. Her eyes met mine again, and this time there was no doubt in her gaze. "Don't fight it," she murmured. I wasn't sure if she meant the physical closeness, the desire, or the pull between us, but I felt every word, every nuance of what she said. I couldn't fight it. I had crossed the threshold. There was no going back now. She slid her hand up my arm and I shuddered. Her fingers were warm against my skin, her touch soft, but it set my nerves on fire. My entire body was on edge, heightened, aware of every little sensation. For a split second, I thought I might lose control, that I might just give in to everything I had been trying to fight. But then she shifted again, pulling herself up slightly in the tub. Her chest brushed against my arm, and the movement felt purposeful. The subtle brush of her body against mine made me inhale sharply. I could feel her breath against my skin. Warm. Intimate. I was no longer sure if I was the one holding back or if it was her. Olivia tilted her head, her lips parting slightly as she looked at me, waiting. It was as if she was daring me to make the next move, to push the boundaries even further, to surrender. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to resist. I wasn't sure how we got here. One moment I was standing at the edge of the tub, and the next, the world around me had narrowed down to just her. The only thing that existed now was Olivia. Her scent, her touch, her gaze. I could feel her eyes on me, hot and intense, daring me to make a move, daring me to lose control. Her hand still rested on my wrist, soft and warm, and I could feel her fingertips subtly pressing into my skin, urging me closer. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, but my body refused to listen. The tension between us was unbearable, like an invisible force pulling us together, making every second feel like it could explode. For a moment I thought about pulling away, walking out, pretending none of this was happening. But the words felt hollow. How could I walk away when she was this close? when her body was just inches away, the heat of the water of her skin enveloping me, when her eyes were dark, filled with something I couldn't name, something dangerous and seductive. Her fingers moved, brushing my skin again, this time lower, tracing the line of my forearm. The touch wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Each movement slow and calculated, sending jolts of heat through my veins. I couldn't stop myself. She leaned forward slightly, her lips just a breath away from mine. My body betrayed me, closing the distance I'd left between us. My pulse quickened. This was happening. There was no more stopping it. "Do you want me to stop?" she whispered, her breath hot against my lips. The question wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. A challenge I was already failing. I didn't answer. I couldn't. In one sharp motion, she reached up, cupping my face with her hand. Her fingers slid into my hair, pulling me down toward her. Her lips pressed against mine, soft at first, testing. And then nothing was soft anymore. The kiss was raw, hungry, like we both needed it too badly to hold back any longer. My hands found her body, instinctively pulling her closer, pressing her against me. The water sloshed around us, splashing onto the floor, but neither of us cared. Her skin was warm and slick beneath my fingertips, and I couldn't get enough of it. I kissed her like it was the only thing that mattered, my mouth desperate against hers, my hands trembling as they traced the curve of her body. Every touch sent a shock through me. Every movement felt like it was undoing something deep inside me, something I had kept buried for far too long. She pulled back, just enough to break the kiss, but her lips hovered close, still touching mine as she spoke. "You feel it, don't you?" Her voice was thick with desire, barely above a whisper. "This connection, this need." I nodded, unable to speak. I could barely breathe. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't tell if it was from the kiss or the fear that we were crossing a line we would never be able to uncross. She didn't give me time to process. With a swift motion, she pulled me closer, her hands tugging at the towel around my waist, her fingers brushing against my skin as she let the fabric fall away. The cool air hit my bare skin, but I didn't feel the chill. I only felt her. Every inch of her body pressed against mine, her warmth, her breath, her heartbeat, all syncing with mine. Her lips were on my neck, kissing, biting, marking me. I gasped, my hands gripping her waist, my fingers digging into her skin. I couldn't stop. It was like we were both driven by something primal, something that didn't care about consequences, about the lines we were crossing. I could hear her breath, shallow and quick, as she trailed kisses down my chest. Her fingers danced over my skin, tracing every line, every curve. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't hesitating. I was lost in her. But then, just as quickly as she had started, she stopped. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, her lips swollen from our kiss. A flash of something, fear? Regret? Passed across her face, but it was gone before I could fully read it. She pushed me back gently, making space between us. For a moment, I thought she was going to pull away entirely, that this was it, that the illusion of control would come crashing down. But instead, she reached for the edge of the tub, steadying herself. Her fingers tightened around the porcelain, and I could see her chest rising and falling, her breath ragged. Then, without a word, she stood. The water sloshed around her, dripping from her body, but she didn't care. She was a vision, drenched in steam, her skin glowing under the dim light, her eyes still locked on mine. She stepped out of the tub, moving slowly, deliberately, until she was standing directly in front of me. I was frozen. My mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, but none of them made sense. She raised a hand to my chest, pressing her palm gently against me. "You want this," she said, her voice low but confident. "Don't pretend you don't." I stared at her, my body betraying me. I wanted to say something, anything, to make sense of what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. I didn't want to pretend anymore. I had stopped pretending the moment I walked into this room. She moved closer, her body brushing against mine. I felt the heat of her, the softness of her skin, and it almost made me lose control again. But this time I stopped myself. This time I was the one who pulled away. Olivia. The name was a whisper, a plea. I wasn't sure what I was asking for, if I wanted to stop or if I wanted more. She didn't seem fazed. In fact, she seemed almost amused. "What's wrong?" Afraid of what happens next. I shook my head. The fear wasn't about what came next. It was about what had already happened. This moment had shattered everything I thought I knew. There was no going back now. I stepped back, trying to distance myself from the overwhelming intensity of the moment. But she followed me, her eyes never leaving mine. "You think I didn't know?" she asked. "That you wouldn't feel this? That I wouldn't feel it?" I didn't know how to respond. All I could do was stare at her, torn between the overwhelming desire and the gnawing sense of guilt that twisted in my stomach. She reached out again, her fingers brushing over my jaw, pulling me back toward her. Her lips found mine once more, soft at first, tentative, but then the pressure grew, the kiss deepening with each passing second. She was showing me there was no turning back. I kissed her back, harder this time, letting the emotion, the need, take over completely. There was nothing left but this fire that consumed us both, burning through everything else in its path. But as our bodies pressed together, the door to reality creaked open. I could hear the sounds of the house around us, the distant hum of the fridge, the low buzz of the air conditioning, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. What were we doing? The thought was fleeting, pushed away by the raw desire and the heat between us. But it was enough to make me hesitate for just a second. I pulled back, my heart hammering in my chest. She was breathing heavily, her eyes wild. "What's wrong?" I didn't know how to answer her. All I knew was that the consequences of this moment were going to be far more complicated than either of us could imagine. The room felt suffocating now. The silence, thick and unbearable, hung between us like a tangible weight. Everything had escalated too quickly, too intensely, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. What had started as a subtle, almost unspoken tension had exploded into something far beyond either of our control. I pulled away from her, breaking the kiss with shaky breath, my fingers still trembling as they grazed her skin. My chest tightened with every breath I took, every heartbeat louder than the last. I couldn't focus on anything except her, the way she was looking at me, the way her body responded to mine. She was a force, something I couldn't contain, and I was losing myself in it. Olivia didn't let the distance last long. She closed the space between us, her eyes never leaving mine, as if daring me to speak, to do something, anything. I swallowed, feeling a strange mix of desire and fear pooling in my stomach. "What are we doing?" I asked, the words stumbling out of my mouth before I could stop them. The question sounded weak, pathetic, but I couldn't help it. My mind was spinning, and I needed to know if we were both trapped in this, or if I was the only one drowning. Olivia's expression didn't shift, but her fingers reached up to cup my face, a gesture that was so intimate, so deliberate, it sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you think we're doing?" Her voice was soft, but the challenge in it was undeniable. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't hesitating. But I was. I could feel my walls crumbling piece by piece, each of her touches chipping away at the self-control I had tried to hold on to. I wanted to fight it, to push her away, to end this before it went too far. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what I wanted. The truth was undeniable. I wanted her. Every part of me wanted her, even though I knew it was wrong. Even though I knew we were crossing a line that would change everything between us. "Olivia." My voice was hoarse now, full of something darker, something deeper. I wasn't sure if I was pleading or demanding. "This can't happen." Her eyes darkened and she stepped closer, her lips brushing against my ear as she whispered, "Why can't it?" "Because it's forbidden." Her breath sent a wave of heat coursing through me, and for a moment I was paralyzed, unable to speak, unable to think. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, each one fighting for dominance. But her touch, the warmth of her hand against my chest, the soft pressure of her body so close to mine, told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't sure how much longer I could fight it. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to anymore. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," I admitted, the words barely escaping my lips. I hated how vulnerable they sounded, how weak. But it was the truth. I was lost, caught between the pull of what we had shared, and the knowledge that this would destroy everything. She smiled, a smile that was full of something dangerous and raw. "You don't have to know. You just have to feel it." Her words were like a command, and I could feel myself slipping further into her orbit, losing myself in her presence. I couldn't breathe without her, couldn't think without her. And that scared me more than anything. I wanted to pull back. I wanted to stop this before it went too far. But I couldn't. Not when she was this close, when she was looking at me like that, daring me to make the choice, to either step back or step forward into the unknown. My hands moved on their own, reaching for her, pulling her into me again. This time there was no hesitation, no second thoughts. Our lips met in a kiss that was everything I had been holding back. It was desperate, hungry, full of the emotion we had both been too scared to admit. I felt the fire of it in every nerve, every muscle. It was like the world had fallen away, and there was only her. Only this. She responded in kind, her hands sliding down my chest, her fingers tracing the muscles beneath my shirt. The air was thick with heat, thick with the weight of everything we had been avoiding. There was no going back now. She broke the kiss again, her lips lingering on mine, and I could see the fire in her eyes. "Don't stop," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We've already gone too far. There's no point in turning back now." I couldn't argue with that. She was right. We had already crossed a line, and now there was nothing left but the fall. Her hands were all over me now, pulling at my clothes, her fingers eager, frantic. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. My body was responding to her in ways I couldn't control, and for the first time in a long time I didn't want to. We were lost in it now, this madness, this need. The world outside the room disappeared, and all that mattered was the heat between us, the electricity in every touch, every kiss. There was no guilt, no fear, just the raw, overwhelming sensation of being alive in this moment, in this connection. But then, as quickly as it had begun, it shattered. I pulled away, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. The reality of what we had done crashed over me like a tidal wave. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of the chaos in my head. Olivia didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, her chest rising and falling, her body still trembling from the intensity of what we had shared. I could see it in her eyes too, the raw emotion, the confusion, the vulnerability. What the hell just happened? I muttered, my voice barely a whisper. Olivia didn't answer. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name, something both terrifying and irresistible. It was as if the walls had come down between us, exposing everything we had been hiding, everything we had been running from. I turned away, needing space, needing to clear my head, but I couldn't. The pull of her was too strong, too consuming, and I knew deep down that there was no going back. Our relationship had changed in ways neither of us could control. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating me. There was no resolution, no answers, just the aftermath. The fallout had begun, and I had no idea where it would lead. The silence between us wasn't just silence, it was suffocating, heavy, alive. I could still feel Olivia's presence in the room, even though she was already halfway to the door. The heat between us had burned fast and hot, leaving behind a raw, open wound. My skin still tingled where she had touched me, but now that touch felt different. Not just electric, dangerous. She was dressed now, but her hands hovered at the hem of her sweater, fidgeting, unsure. That confidence she had earlier, when she whispered against my ear, when she dared me to give in, it was unraveling. She wasn't invincible. Neither of us were. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breath, but it didn't work. My pulse was still racing, not from excitement anymore, but from something deeper, something colder. Regret? No, not regret. Something worse. Olivia turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Say something." Her voice was quieter now. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was I supposed to say? That I wished it hadn't happened? That I wished it had? That I wanted her again, right now, despite everything? I don't know what to say. My voice was rougher than I intended, like it hurt to speak the words aloud. She swallowed hard, glancing down at her hands before letting out a small, bitter laugh. "Right. Of course you don't." She pulled her bag over her shoulder, adjusting the strap like it was the only thing holding her together. Then she turned back to the door, reaching for the handle, but she didn't open it. "Not yet." "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. I should have answered quickly. I should have said yes. I should have lied. But I didn't. I hesitated, and in that hesitation I knew the truth. We had already gone too far to take it back. "I don't know." It was the only honest answer I could give. She exhaled sharply, but she didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked like she had been expecting that. "I should go," she said, but she still wasn't moving. For a second, just a second, I thought she would stay. That she was waiting for me to stop her. That if I reached out, she'd come back and we'd both pretend that this was normal, that this was okay. But I didn't move. I watched her turn the knob, watched her hesitate one last time, and then just like that she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her and I was alone. I stood there staring at the empty space where she had been, where we had stood together just moments ago, tangled in something we had no business wanting. The room smelled like her. Her shampoo, her perfume, the heat of her skin still clinging to the air. The sheets were wrinkled where we had sat. The mirror near the dresser was still fogged from the heat of our breath. But she was gone. I should have felt relieved. Instead, all I felt was the aching emptiness of wanting something I was never supposed to have. I turned away, bracing my hands on the edge of the dresser, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was flushed, my lips swollen. I looked like someone I didn't recognize. Someone reckless. Someone selfish. Someone who would do it again. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to will away the images flashing through my mind. The way her body had felt against mine, the sound of her voice, the look in her eyes when she asked if I regretted it. Because the truth was, I didn't regret it. And that terrified me more than anything.